was magical. You know, you talk about things falling apart in your yard. We never saw that, you know. I mean, nothing ever fell apart. It was like an amusement park. As a child, to grow up and go play in her yard, you know, it was, her sister would take us over, and I looked so forward to it because you could just reach in the tree and pull out a car and play in the yard. It was, you know, I mean, looking at the pictures inside of her house, I just remembered sitting on the sofa with the room with all the dolls around it. But we didn't think anything any different of it. We would sit and, yeah, it was normal. We would sit and watch television with her. She loved wrestling. We would watch wrestling. And we didn't realize what type of greatness we were in the presence of, but it was a very magical place. And to sit here, I asked my cousin, I said, I wonder what Aunt Nellie would say today if she could see all of this. But you did a fantastic, I really enjoyed this presentation. It was,
thank you.
It just, I was there. It was all of a sudden 1965 and I was playing in the yard again. And she was a beautiful person, and you know, besides all of the notoriety that she's gathered over the years, you know, she'll always be Aunt Nellie to us, and she'll always be, you know, you would have had to live it. You know, you can't really explain it, but yeah, thank you for the presentation. It was beautiful. Thank you.
You're very welcome. I'm going back to the picture of the house because there was something which I had wanted to mention in my talk and somehow missed the chance to squeeze it in, but it was actually a story that Jay Weiland told me about these orange windows on the house, that apparently a film crew came to film her and covered the windows with an orange gelatin paper in order to adjust the light levels inside the house. And she liked it so much that she kept it for months or maybe even years. And when I was going over the slides earlier, Kevin, who's somewhere up there and who's an artist, said what is really true. She was an amazing colorist. And here she is. These are complementary colors on the color wheel. I'm sure she never looked at the color wheel or could care less, but she's managed to combine two colors that artists who are trained in color theory know snap together. And she was an incredible colorist. And you know, I had a great, a telling conversation with someone earlier this evening who said, you know, I love the drawings, but I don't always understand them. And I hope you'll go away feeling that that's pretty okay, because there's a lot there, and it is a kind of rapture of the deep. And some of the parts of the drawing are really partly about, oh, I just started making this, and then, boy, I just got into doing this and doing that. And that's something artists know about, that just the sheer, Xenia has in one of her articles a line that says something about the sheer pleasure of a beautiful line.
I wanted to ask if you could talk more about the artists that influenced her, because the time period in which she lived, there were some major art movements, particularly among African-American artists, and I'm wondering if she responded to Harlem Renaissance artists, any artists from the WPA, or any artists coming out in the 60s from the Black Arts Movement and things like that. I'm just curious to see, would like to know if you know any information about how these different movements and artists impacted the work that she did.
Well, I see a lot of head shaking over here in the center. I asked Jay in an email if he ever saw her looking at any art books, because there are some self-taught artists that do go to the library, look at art books. I think I shouldn't you should go ahead and say what you think, but my impression is that she was influenced by her unconscious. I mean, there was a lot, she had an amazing mind. And those descriptions of how she worked and where her ideas came from. Now, you know, some people don't believe that there is such a thing as a collective unconscious, but I was just at the Rubin Museum a few weeks ago in New York, and I saw the Carl Jung Red Book. You know, he was the psychologist, a colleague of Freud's, who really developed the idea of the collective unconscious. And it was a notion that at some level, below the logic and reason and so on, we all are tapped into ideas, images, visions. That's why, you know, you can go to a bookstore and open a book on something like circles, and you'll see circles from Indonesia and circles from Australia and circles from 600 years ago and circles from last month by artists, and there are common themes. So I think that those were some of the things she was influenced by. There isn't a lot written about the family life, about her parents, and except that they were great storytellers. Music also. I mean, there just wasn't time, but if you've ever seen the Nellie's Playhouse, the DVD film, you see her playing. She had 2 electric organs, one in each room. And she loved singing, she loved gospel music. Maybe that gave her some visions.
Just a second, I have a question. Did anybody, any of her family members want to elaborate on that question about her? When everybody was vigorously shaking their heads, did anybody want to say anything else about her looking or not looking at other artists' work?
I don't think she did it from the perspective of setting out to become an artist. I don't think that was ever in her mind. From my experience with her as a child until her death, it was always about the joy of doing it. And it was as though all of this was just inside her and had to come out. And I don't think it would have been a situation where she saw anyone else's work and was influenced, but perhaps maybe past experiences or things of that nature might have influenced some of the things that she did. But it was truly from her spirit. And I think that she knew that and she believed that, which is why she mentioned the fact that it was a gift from God. And I think that's pretty much what it was.
I think she did, she certainly did like it when people responded to her art. But she probably was a little surprised at people's enthusiasm for it as well, because as you say, she wasn't setting out to, although I did read in one of the transcripts of one of the interviews that she said something about it isn't really a drawing until somebody comes and takes it away. Which is part of why I got interested in this whole idea of relational aesthetics. And I didn't mean to put in a jargon word, but there's a lot of art today which is involved with artists who kind of have an idea that they set in motion, and it pulls other people into it so that, and maybe she was referencing something like that.
Hi. Several stories came to mind just hearing these questions. And when I first met her in 1971, I remember and going into her house. You asked what was her process like, and at that point she didn't think of herself as an artist at all in those days. You know, she was just always creating, and being with her was just watching her. She was always in motion, moving from one vignette to another and rearranging things and sitting down at her organ and playing a little bit of music and then moving on to something else. So that was what it was like to be with her for me, and I think Probably I'm not alone in that. And a couple of other memories. Going to New York with her when she had her show at the gallery in New York. I can't remember the name of it. What? Betty Parsons Gallery? Maybe it was. It was the first time she'd ever been out of the state of Georgia, except once she'd gone to Chattanooga, I think. But needless to say, she'd never been on an airplane. And the thing that impressed her the most, she told me, was the way the clouds looked from the air. That really impressed her. And we went to the Guggenheim Museum, and everybody was all, oh, isn't this wonderful, Nellie, you know, walking around. And she wasn't very impressed with that. She said that she'd been in a place like that before, only that place you went and your skin turned blue. Oh. And we were going, what could that be? And it turned out it was the Polaris Lounge on top of the Hyatt Hotel, which, you know, and I thought, everybody was blue, you know, everybody was blue, and that made an impression. And the other thing was walking around at Judith's gallery. I would just sort of follow her around when she had a show and listen to what she was saying to people. And the same drawing, she would always say something different. It was whatever came through her at that moment. She never claimed to have any control really over it or any thought over it. It was all inspiration. And she has passed that on in a beautiful way.
I think what you're saying is exactly why I went from the drawings to the interiors into the yard, that it is that process of kind of moving from one thing to another and kind of a process, and they're all connected. You don't know where one piece stops and the other one begins. And by the way, this is Judith Alexander Augustine, who did, she looks awfully young for having gone to college way back as, and also Jay Weiland, could you just stand up also? And you know, these photographs are treasures. Right. Yes, she drew from the television set.
And also the of the wrestlers, and so as far as artistic influence, it was life. Mm-hmm. She
right.
just was constantly enjoying life, and my children loved her so much because she had enough sense to remain a child until the day she died.
Yeah. And
children see right to the heart of that.
About the chewing gum sculptures, she told me that a fly had flown into her mouth once, and there was this constant jumping in her head, and that she chewed chewing gum to keep the jumping down. And when she was done with it, she'd put it in what she called the Frigidaire until she was inspired to pull some out and make a sculpture out of it, and that's where the chewing gum sculptures came from. Is that right?
As a young 20-something new to Atlanta, I guess I was too naive to know that I was viewing the crossroads of American self-taught art, but I did know every time I drove by her house, it made me smile.
Hi, a little broader and different question, but as an art historian who enjoys self-taught art, how do you think that museums and the art world are going to treat self-taught art 25, 50 years from now?
This is actually a huge question, and one of the reasons why I like the Hive Museum so much is because you were one of the first museums in the country to really, first of all, collect self-taught art, and then to show it, to have it around, to be able, for people to be able to see work from one part of the world and then to go downstairs and see Nellie Mae Rowe. There is, this is a diversion, but it's kind of a funny thing. There's a blog on the internet kept by somebody who I don't think she works here now, but used to work here in the museum. If you're in the audience and you're this person, please raise your hand.